Good afternoon, Happy New Year, and welcome to our first webinar of 2024 on reviewing your safeguarding training calendar. I'm very excited to be joined on today's webinar by Michelle Hayward, who is an education consultant and the CEO of Ordinary Classrooms. Safeguarding is a critical aspect of education, ensuring the welfare and protection of children and young people. Schools play a pivotal role in this process, and one of the key tools in maintaining a safe and secure learning environment is the safeguarding training calendar. Regularly reviewing and updating this calendar is essential to meet legal requirements, enhance staff awareness, and ultimately create a safer and more nurturing school environment. This webinar is part of a series of webinars that we're running to highlight some of the key issues facing education. We'll use these webinars to identify new productive practices and display some of the solutions and services that we and our partners have available to support you. Let's start off with some introductions. My name is Damien Roberts. I'm one of the directors and co-founders of an education-focused software house called Deventio Education. We're based in Derby in the UK, and our main focus is developing the IP suite for schools and colleges. We've been in business since 2006, and we now work with over 700 schools and colleges and educational institutions across the globe. My contact details are displayed on this slide, and please do get in touch if you have any queries. There are also links on here to our social media channels. We pride ourselves on keeping these updated with the latest information, so please join the conversation. Please subscribe, follow, like, and share. So let me also introduce you to our guest speaker today, who is Michelle Prosser Hayward, CEO of Ordinary Classrooms. Michelle has recently set up the Ordinary Classrooms educational consultancy to write about and share knowledge on how to support and adapt learning for learners experiencing a wide range of difficulties with their learning, and to support leadership in schools by providing training for all teachers from early career to executive leadership. Michelle also offers school consultancy and leadership coaching. During this webinar, there's a chat facility that will enable you to ask any questions of Michelle, and I will be reading these from those at the end of the webinar. I will now hand over to Michelle, our resident expert on reviewing your safeguarding training calendar. Over to you, Michelle.
Thank you, Damien. Okay, let me just share my screen. Okay, so the screen is there. I just can't see it on my screen. Okay, welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening, and thank you for listening to me, coming to listen to me about safeguarding. I am, as Damien says, an expert in safeguarding, SEND and in inclusion, and I did set up the Ordinary Classrooms consultancy last year. This is based upon a book that I wrote in 2019 called Research SEND in Ordinary Classrooms. Research SEND belonged to the University of Wolverhampton. Ordinary Classrooms belong to me. So therefore, my classroom. And I believe that actually if we get it right in every single classroom for every single child, that's my philosophy. So welcome, thank you very much. You'll see there is a little picture of me. Most people say to me that I do look like my photo, except if you ever meet me in real life, I am actually a lot shorter than you imagine. A lot of people say, oh, you're a lot shorter than I thought. So yes, I do look like my LinkedIn photo, but I am much shorter in real life. So thank you very much for that introduction. You'll see there on that slide where I can be contacted, but you can just put Michelle Prosser Hayward into Google. You can also put Ordinary Classrooms into Google and you'll find us. So thank you very much. So let's start off with, we are talking about reviewing your safeguarding training calendar. And this comes from two of the documents that we need to be mindful of in education. Keeping Children Safe in Education 2023. Now, those of you will know that this is reviewed every single year, and this is about what we must be doing in school in terms of our safeguarding responsibilities. The other document that we need to have due regard to is Working Together to Safeguard Children. This has just recently been reviewed, and you'll see the date on my slide there that says December 2023. That's another document that we need to have due regard to. That tells us around about the policy around local authorities and social services and how they work together to safeguard our children. So the document that we have to have most heed to when we're thinking about our safeguarding training calendar and the safeguarding work that we do in school is keeping children safe in education. As I say, that's reviewed every single year, and fairly there'll be a review out for that document, and that's usually active, and the new one will be out later in the year. So we always have to make sure that we do have a calendar of activity. One of the key principles of keeping children safe in education, and never changes apart from maybe a little bit of wording, is the statement that we have there on the PowerPoint. So safeguarding and promoting the welfare of children is everyone's responsibility. That's everyone in school, not just your teaching staff. Everyone who comes into contact with children and their families has a role to play. To fulfil this responsibility effectively, all practitioners should make sure their approach is child-centred. This means that they should consider at all times what is in the best interest of the child. And that's the statement that I would always put at the top of my policy. I would always put at the top of my training. So even though we are talking about the safeguarding training calendar, this is the statement that should run all the way through your safeguarding policies. This is the wording that you should be using. Okay, so building a culture of safeguarding in schools is one of the bedrocks of the Keeping Children Safe in Education guidance. And you can see there that I've pointed out 5 elements of that building culture. The first thing is that all staff understand their responsibilities in regard to safeguarding and child protection, including how and when to report and how. This is very important when you are reviewing your safeguarding training calendar, because you need to keep reminding your staff how to report, how and when. And there's lots of knowledge that they need around safeguarding that you just need to be developing. So that's an important element of why you should have a safeguarding training calendar, and more about that in a moment and what that should include. There should be clear policies and procedures in place. And as we said on the previous slide, in terms of keeping children safe in education, it's incredibly important that you recognise those changes that take place annually and which policies and guidance have been included. We said on the previous slide that things like internet safety have much more information over the last few years since lockdown has been given around guidance on internet and online safety. And this year there's been requirements around filtering and monitoring, for example. So it's very important that you keep up to date and you keep your staff up to date where and when and how. It might be that, for example, with filtering and monitoring, they don't need quite a lot of information, but just to be aware that that's a new guidance. All members of staff, including volunteers and temporary workers on site, such as contractors, now need to be aware of your safeguarding policy. So perhaps before they may have not needed a DBS particularly, but now those people also need a DBS. They also need to be aware of your policies, and they also need to be aware of, so it would be a bit like inducting them as you would with new staff. So there are some things, and actually that's quite important from your staff to be aware of, that how do they challenge people on site that they don't recognise? What different lanyards might you give to people? How do you make sure that people walking around your building, for example, contractors and visitors, have undergone safeguarding? So again, that could be something you could build into your safeguarding calendar as you go through the year. All age appropriate materials should enable your learners. So again, within your safeguarding training calendar, how do you make sure that your learners are aware of when they're being abused, when they need to be aware and report their concerns, and who they report those concerns to? So again, your learners need to be aware of the policies in an age appropriate way and at an age ability level as well. At number 5, you can see there I've put in red, and that says beyond the annual refresher. So you should have an annual refresher, which basically, as I've said, takes you through all of those things that you need to do annually. But then beyond that annual refresher, you need to keep your staff up to date with regular training and updates throughout the year. And that's why we have a safeguarding training calendar. And what sort of elements should you put into that? How should you keep your staff informed with what you were doing? So here's one that takes us up to February. So this is our safeguarding calendar that I've created with several schools that I work with. And these are the sorts of things that we are looking at. So you can see in September, we're talking about that annual refresher, that presentation of those revised policies. What are the changes to keeping children safe in education? What have we done? What is our September training calendar going to look like? We will highlight those policy updates and changes, as I've said earlier. We might go through a refresher. Most schools will do this. Let's have a reminder about those identification of the signs of abuse. And then let's also have a reminder about how as staff we report concerns and what should be reporting, and how we will use the systems that we've got in place in school. Not going to talk about the systems in particular because most of you will have different reporting systems and where you report things. But again, here is about reminding staff about what they can write in those boxes with whichever reporting system that you use. So that's a good idea in September. Usually on the first day back, many schools will do that, or they will sign into an online resource which might provide that for you. You can make it yourself. You can use commercial products. You'll also see then that we have in October a lot of work on online safety and cyberbullying, because as we know, this is a growing concern within schools with our pupils. And here we've got the medical policy as well, because of the connections between perhaps the medical policy, safeguarding. It could be that you might want to combine your safeguarding training calendar with your medical advice, with your SEND policy, with your medical, with your mental health policy. So it could be that here you could have in September some reminders on SEND and your policies around SEND, for example, and what changes you may have made there. So it could be that it doesn't necessarily just need to cover safeguarding, but in this particular session, that's what we're talking about. So you can see then that's mainly in September and October, updates around what you need to make sure your staff are aware of. We then start getting into December, and again, you don't need to take to use this order. It's completely up to you. And again, you might decide what order you want to go to, depending on the contextual environment that your school is in. So it might be that some safeguarding issues are more prevalent than others. So you will see then from December onwards that mostly it's around information awareness and the way we've tried to group some of the things that may have some commonalities between them. So today we're going to have a look at what February might look like, and I'm going to take you through an example of how you might run the training for February, which is domestic abuse. And if you're following my calendar, then it might be that that's where you are anyway. It doesn't matter, like we say, which order you might do it in. You might decide that that's not February. You might have done that in October. It might be that you're not doing that until May, and then you can save these resources until then. So just a bit of an example now of how you might put that safeguarding calendar together. So as I say, from December onwards, you might then start looking about it's an information awareness, but still running your policies and procedures through those awareness sessions. So I always think that when you are running your training session with your staff and running your safeguarding calendar, that there are some commonalities that you will run through that training and those sessions with your staff. So one of the things that you might want to do is remind staff of the different types of abuse. Now, I know we talked about that in the September calendar, so we could just go back, but it might be that that's something you want to have at the front of each training session or integrated somewhere within your training session. Also with that proviso that I've got in red down the bottom there, so children who are victims of abuse may not tell anyone at the time or at all, and some may not be able to articulate what is happening to them. If they do try and tell someone, it is important you understand how a child may present if they are being abused and how they may tell you. Your knowledge of the child is equally important, as this may help you to establish if a child is at risk of being abused or is at risk of being abused. So it may well be that you also remind your staff. We do a lot of focus on disclosure, but sometimes, as you will see later, sometimes it's a chronology of events that may lead up to something. And actually, we talk a lot about disclosure, but some children do not have the capacity, the skills, or the experience to be able to provide that information for you. So that would be something that you would run through and that you would remind your staff of probably most of the time when you are reviewing your safeguarding training. And it can be that you might want to use some of these slides. We do set these slides up at Ordinary Classrooms so that you are able to make them your own. So it might be that you want to use some of the slides that we've presented here and adapt them for your own setting. So before you think about what your element of your safeguarding training calendar might be, one of the things you might want to have a look at, and I've provided the link below, is some of the resources from the EEF around professional development. So when we're talking about professional development, we're not just talking here about subject expertise. This is also staff development around safeguarding and that within your school. So you might want to have a look at some of the things here that are suggested around how you might present your training. This box here, this yellow one in the middle, is particularly interesting in terms of the kinds of methods that you might use in order to review that safeguarding training calendar. So it talks about building knowledge, the same as we would with children in terms of managing cognitive load and revising prior learning. So as if you remember, if I said if you go through the areas of abuse, then you will then be revising prior learning and you will start managing cognitive load and retrieval practice. Motivate staff. How are you going to present your safeguarding calendar across the year so that staff want to agree, want to get involved, know the importance of it? And it may be that that's a mixture of things to be motivating staff. It might be that you've got outside speakers. It might be that sometimes you use a recording. It might be that you use somebody else's resources. And sometimes it could be a face-to-face where you stand up in the front of your staff and talk that through. So have a look at the different ways. Look down this yellow box around the sorts of ways that you might want to present. Talks about developing your teaching techniques. How are you going to make sure that your staff are engaged and that you're getting some feedback as well from them around their knowledge? If we go back to the September part of the calendar, for example, it might be, as I've done in several schools, is used a Google's form, which will ask like a quiz at the end of the session. And also that can cover things like, have you read the latest part of the section A of Keeping Children in Safe? That could be used as part of the signing in to say that staff have actually undertaken that job. So there are ways that you might monitor and feedback as well, and check understanding and meet some of your requirements. So it might be that you might send out a discussion each week about a safeguarding issue, and that might then the answer might be on Microsoft Forms or a Google form about what people will do. And I know some schools that do that. That's like a concern of the week type of activity. So just think about how you might think about running that safeguarding training across the year so that staff are fully engaged and refer to the EEF guidance. The full documents are available, but as you know, with the EEF, they do provide you with quite a nice poster element as well. Okay, so we're talking about Domestic abuse, this is February's focus, and I've split that into 3 parts. So the first part, and it might be that you use this with all the way that you do all of your sessions. So it might be you decide, right, I'm going to do a 3-part process. So for domestic abuse, we're saying it's understanding domestic abuse, including the local authority context. So you need to know what context you are working in. Contextual safeguarding is quite an important aspect now, keeping children safe in education. The signs of domestic abuse in children, so what are we looking for? How can we identify it? And then reporting domestic abuse. If you are running this with your staff and you are the DSL, then obviously your staff report that to you. If you are a DSL listening to this webinar at the moment, then reporting domestic abuse, you will know within your local authority what your next stages are and where you need to go. So you need to be very aware, if you're a DSL, what the contextual response is within your local area and what services you may be able to tap into. There are some national services that will support you, but there are also local procedures and policies that you need to be aware of, and they vary from local authority to local authority. So you do need to be aware of what your local authority is advising you in terms of your DSL duties. Okay, so if we're looking at understanding domestic abuse and including the local authority context, it might be sometimes when you start your training, one of the ways that might grab at people's attention is maybe some data. And if you know about domestic abuse and you're a DSL, then you'll know the organisation Operation Encompass. And so you can go to their website and perhaps get some statistics and data from their website. So you can use anybody's PowerPoints that you want. And if you go back to the EEF guidance, it talks about looking at evidence from other places to improve and support your message. So Operation Encompass is an organisation that supports domestic violence. This might be some of the resources that you might want to look at. If you are a DSL, you may want to undertake their training. They do offer some free training. You might want some other members of staff within your school to undertake their training as well. So it's worth a visit to their website. They are a national organisation, and most Operation Encompass are mostly prevalent in most local authorities. They work with the police force. So you probably, if you are a DSL, come across them. But again, have a look at their resources. This is their area of expertise, if you like. So they are going to have the latest resources, which might be useful, which you might want to use to present that part of your safeguarding calendar. The next element that we've talked about is know your context. So, for example, this is taken from the Birmingham website. So if you're in Birmingham, that's brilliant. But make sure you look what your local authority is saying about their response. So you can see here, Birmingham, thank you very much. This is a really clear way of doing it. You've said our response to domestic abuse. So again, if you're a DSL, this will help you in terms of what your understanding is contextually in your local area, but it might be a slide that you want to show with your staff as well to help you deliver the message around what domestic abuse looks like, or whichever area of your safeguarding calendar you are focused on. And again, we stay with Birmingham, and you can see that Birmingham have produced a very good slide, which I think is really useful in terms of definitions of domestic abuse. So it might be that you might not be in Birmingham, but you might want to use their slide. This is pasted onto here. So if you are using my slide deck, then you can just take this off here. Remember, if you are using other people's resources, to make sure that you clearly state where those resources have come from. But you could go to other local authority sites. You may not find such a clear presentation. You might do. So it's always worth networking across the country about what might be around elsewhere. So this is quite useful. We've got a definitions of domestic abuse. We've got the legislation which is always quite useful, and then understanding what that might look like. So coupled with your Operation Encompass, perhaps resources, you've got some quite good information to help your staff understand domestic abuse and then what your local authority context might be. So it might be, instead of using Operation Encompass slides, your local authority might have a slide deck of the prevalence of this particular of domestic abuse within your local authority, which might give you some understanding. There might be some local charities, there might be some local work groups that are working with you. So it's worth having a look. Again, if we go back to the EEF resources, one of the things it talks about is retrieval practice, as we would with our class, so like a low stakes, if you like, quiz. So it might be that you either want a quiz at the end, a quiz at the beginning, or you want to break up your sessions with a quiz. Just checks understanding, doesn't it? Just maybe breaks up the session. So, for example, we might be talking about coercive control. You've just presented a slide with some definitions on, or you might have asked your staff to read that slide. You can then check their understanding. So the micromanagement of which aspect of a person's life is sometimes a characteristic of coercive control. And we know that the answer is everyday life. But you can have a discussion that it may be around financial decisions and what that might look like. It might be around social interactions, and it might be around career choices. Okay, but it could be all of those things as well. So again, these sorts of slides, these quizzes might promote some kind of discussion. I always find them quite useful when I'm undertaking training, to put in a few questions, or like I say, sometimes I might start with these questions at the beginning and have sent some materials out to people in advance. Okay, so that our next section then is the signs of domestic abuse in children. So how do we support our staff so that they know the sorts of things that they need to be looking at? And again, I said refer to different resources. And so here again, we've got Operation Encompass down here. And they've given us some information on that. We've got Women's Aid, and they've got a great page on their website. And again, the link is there, talking about what is domestic abuse. So you could use their webpage, and also always refer to the NSPCC as well. So there you've got the insights on the impact of coercive control on children and young people from the NSPCC. So you can use lots of different resources. And that's really good practice to be able to do that. Just do a screenshot as I've done here, and pop those into your PowerPoint. So you're starting to give different definitions as well as awareness of different areas that your staff might go to, or you yourself might go to. Again, talking about support in the local area, you might have a Women's Aid support group in the local area that may be able to support you with some elements of this. There might be a refuge, for example, in your area, and some pupils from your school may be supported by that particular charity. Again, you can come back to a question. From what we have seen, who does the majority of domestic abuse target? So another conversation that you might want to talk about, bring into your discussion, and keep listening and looking at those signs of domestic abuse, so that we don't talk about stereotypes and generalistic types of views. So always try and keep a question in, try and keep a discussion as you go through that relates to what you are talking about. Okay, so our next section is reporting domestic abuse. So here's an opportunity for you again to talk about and remind your staff how you report your concerns in school. So this would have been covered as part of your safeguarding calendar in September, but again, keep it going as the EEF guidance says to us. Just keep reinforcing things as you would because this is good learning, as you would do in your own classrooms. So reporting the concerns, we all know if you've got any concerns about a child, you should act on those immediately. You will have a conversation with your DSL. So if you're a DSL listening to this, then that's what you'll be saying. You'll be checking that that's what your staff are doing, or using your staff reporting system. Now in your school, as we say, reporting systems vary from one school to another. So we're not giving you any guidance here on what that should be, but we know that some schools now use electronic systems, and the DSL will get a notification that that's gone in. Some schools which are smaller will be able to find their DSL, but the requirement here is that the DSL is available at all times, or there is a deputy DSL on site, so that always safeguarding concerns can be reported. And that can be something you can remind your staff of. Again, this is the timetable, this is where you'll find the DSLs, this is how you report things. You mustn't leave the school premises without reporting any concerns. And as we say, DSLs and deputy DSLs timetables should be known to all staff. So every time you do this, this can be a reminder, or every month or so, just remind people where you are, what and how to report. Also, you can support perhaps your beginner teachers a little bit more if they're not sure about reporting systems, and perhaps offer some mentoring to people who are less sure about what they need to be doing. Okay, so the last part of the three-part system within your safeguarding calendar training is what we've said is reporting domestic abuse. So we've just spoken about what your general reporting system might look like, and then you can always provide an example, made up example, obviously, but actually just to show how things, chronology and evidence gets collected over time, so that everything that your staff report is considered. So even if you're not sure, we always remind our staff, don't we, that they need to report it regardless. So no, all information is useful. So we've got things, for example, initial observations, and this is the class teacher, Miss Johnson. She observed significant changes in this child's behaviour. In this case, she's called Maria, over a few months, and we've just popped in a couple of dates there so that you can demonstrate to staff that actually, if Mrs. Johnson is writing that within her on your reporting system, that quite a few times there then becomes a pattern of behaviour, you know, something that we might need to investigate. So she was once an enthusiastic and high performing student, but she's become quiet and disengaged. And again, might be a student that's not high performing, but has still become disengaged. So you're just trying to demonstrate to your staff that changes in behaviour, as we know generally, when children are being abused, not just in domestic abuse cases, that actually changes in behaviour can signify that maybe something has happened in that child's life. We've got attendance here, so obviously we've got quite a lot of examples which may not be necessarily true, but the sorts of elements of evidence that we might collect, if you like. So we've got a class teacher or subject teacher writing and being concerned. We know that the child's perhaps not performing as well as they were, and then obviously we've got the attendance, and that's being monitored as well, and we know that's quite a DFE process at the focus at the moment, don't we? So we were doing this anyway in schools, but actually now, so what's happening with attendance? So you can see the groups of people that are starting to move together to identify that maybe something is going on in Maria's life. So we've got a subject teacher reporting that to the DSL, and then we've got attendance as well. So you can see we're starting to get multidisciplinary team together in terms of those initial observations. Now, we know with abuse that there's often physical indicators. So in this particular example that we're using, we've got some bruises which have been reported to safeguarding, and a black eye which have been reported to safeguarding. She's obviously, this is a worked example. This may not be, but this has been put down to the reasons and not the reason that obviously you're going to reveal later. So obviously, as the DSL, you might fill that part in and say, well, this is what we would do in a school in terms of our processes and procedures if you reported this to us. We've got a child that's suddenly becoming anxious and edgy. And so again, the subject teacher or the class teacher started to record that on your safeguarding record. So you can see we're getting quite a lot of different behaviours. This may not be true of every single child, as we know, but it just gives you an example and helps you work through with your teachers, where we've talked about in the previous slides what the signs of domestic abuse, what can you see from the information that you've got in front of you, and it is kind of sort of explaining your job as a DSL to your teachers and where their information goes when they've reported it, because we know sometimes as a DSL you don't go back to your teachers necessarily with some of the information and some of the work, the things that you've reported on, unless absolutely necessary. And as we said, there's some differences in academic performance as well. So a couple of things that might indicate that, but they're the same kind of indicators that might indicate abuse as well, of physical and the 4 areas of abuse that we started with. So what makes it different? What makes it domestic abuse? Well, that will be the next element, where you'll talk about perhaps a disclosure that Maria has made in terms of saying that somebody in the family is causing the bruises and the black eyes and those sorts of things, and frightening her in her house, or those sorts of things, or that the domestic abuse, it may be might be by what we call proxy. So it may be a parent, one parent that's abusing another parent, and she's getting in the crossfire, for example. So that might happen as well. So there might be that she's a victim of it, but it also might be that she's a victim of parental abuse as well, which would make it the domestic abuse. So then therefore, as a DSL, you would then be reporting that onwards and showing your staff how to make those reports based upon your reporting procedures within school. So when you're reviewing your safeguarding calendar, try and think of the areas that are pertinent to your school. Think about the context of which you work in as a school, what's really important, what's happening in your local area, because you might need to, if there's lots of domestic abuse happening in your local area, because it's been reported to you by the police or through organisations around you, then it might be that you need to do a little bit more, and you might need to add that to your safeguarding calendar later. But it might just be that it's an awareness raising session, and that it's around knowledge sharing and where that might then fit within your calendar. It's difficult, isn't it, as we said, with the calendar, trying to impart a lot of knowledge onto your staff so that they are aware of what they need to look like and how to report things. But as we've seen with Maria, with the bruises on her arm, as a DSL, they're the sorts of things that you would be looking into, whether it was caused by peer-on-peer abuse, or whether it was caused by a parent, whether it was caused by a fight that she had out school, for example. You would be investigating anyway. It might not necessarily be around domestic abuse, and that's where you would make the differences and talk about what we might see in those children. So just before we finish, we'll just go to the final slide, and then you'll see that coming next, we are looking at what we might do for the rest of the year, and how at Ordinary Classrooms we can support you in reviewing that safeguarding calendar. We can work with you to develop some of the areas that you might want to talk about. We can bespoke our training, which most of our training tends to be, to support you with some of these sessions. We can record sessions for you. We have got those materials, so you can see what's coming next. We're in February, and then we have got other sessions there that we can talk to you about and develop with you, and have those resources ready if you're following our safeguarding calendar. If not, then you can keep those for next year or later in the year. and I've just put there, I know you've got it at the beginning, but if you do need to contact me and you do want to talk to me about safeguarding or auditing or anything that you require extra support on, then if you just email me at ordinaryclassrooms.outlook.com, and you can find me on most socials as either Michelle Haywood, Michelle Prosser Haywood, or Ordinary Classrooms. Thank you for joining us this evening. It's been a pleasure.
So thank you, Michelle, for delivering the webinar there for us. If you found this webinar interesting and insightful, then please do feel free to continue the conversation with Michelle at Ordinary Classrooms using the contact details here. Michelle, thank you so much for your time today, and we look forward to collaborating with you again in the future.
Thank you.
So that brings us to the end of our webinar today. If you're interested in finding out more about the IP Suite or would like to discuss any of these issues in more detail, you can always book a further demonstration by scanning the QR code here. You can also book a free online demonstration at a date or time to suit you. And as a recap, the IP Suite manages staff performance, professional development, development plans, self-evaluation, policy management, and establishment-wide audits. So that's things like safeguarding, quality control, and sustainability. Also, why not check out our website? We've been working hard to redevelop our website to make it simpler and easier to access all the relevant information. Again, use the QR code or simply go to www.deventioeducation.com. There's loads of information for schools, colleges, and other education providers with an opportunity to book a free demonstration and also to download a brochure. So thanks for watching, and I look forward to catching up with you at the next webinar. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Bye for now.